Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm super excited that you guys are going to be doing the Power Yoga 60-minute flow. And before we get started in that, I wanted to break down a Chaturanga pose. So Chaturanga we use a lot during our Power Yoga 60 flow. And there are many different ways to do a Chaturanga. So you pick the one that's going to suit your body right now. And one is not better than the other. If you've been doing yoga for a really long time, you might choose one variation. If you're brand new, you might choose a different variation. Maybe you're dealing with any shoulder injuries or wrist injuries, so pick the one that's going to suit your body. So let's get started. So the first variation of Chaturanga I'm going to show you. Come into a high plank pose. So my shoulders are stacked right over my wrists. My thighs are squeezing in together. Shoulder blades drawing in towards my spine. I'm going to hinge forward, bend my elbows into low plank. So this is Chaturanga. Then I move to upward facing dog by pressing the tops of my feet into my mat. And notice my thigh bones are lifted off my mat. So that will come with core strength, like maybe your legs are down on the ground, that's okay. But eventually you're going to draw your belly in, lift your thigh bones off your mat, and then hips up and back, downward facing dog. So that's one variation of Chaturanga. I'll show it to you again. So inhale to high plank, exhale to low, bend your elbows, upward facing dog, downward facing dog. Okay, so that is the first variation. So the second variation I'm going to show you is very similar. The only difference is you're going to drop your knees down to your mat. So we're going to start the same way. Come into a high plank pose. Belly's drawn in. Legs are squeezing towards each other. Now I'm going to drop to my knees. So my belly is still engaged. My fingers are spread, like nothing else has changed except I've dropped to my knees. Now I shift forward, bend my elbows, low plank. Upward facing dog is the same. Downward facing dog. So I'll show that to you again. High plank pose, drop to your knees. Low plank, bend your elbows. Upward facing dog, downward facing dog. Okay, so that was your second variation of Chaturanga. So the last variation I'm going to show you is slightly different, but very easily accessible. So we're going to go into our high plank pose, drop to your knees. Now we're going to lower all the way to our belly. So rather than doing the hover of the Chaturanga, so I've dropped all the way down to my belly. And instead of doing upward facing dog, I'm going to do cobra pose. So pressing into my hands, lift my chest up. It's a little lift. Okay, so this is your cobra. From here, to get to my down dog, I first have to move into tabletop pose, so hands and knees. So shoulders stacked over wrists, hips over knees. And then from here, curl your toes under, hips up and back, downward facing dog. So let's try that again. High plank pose, drop to your knees. Lower all the way down to your belly. Cobra pose, tabletop, downward facing dog. So there you go, you've got three options. And feel free to, switch it up throughout your practice. Like there are days where I might start with the full high plank to low plank Chaturanga. Maybe halfway through my practice I'm feeling a bit tired and I'll choose to drop to my knees. There's no shame in that whatsoever. You just work with where your body's at that moment. Really quick, I want to show you a couple of things to look out for and to keep in mind as you're doing your Chaturanga. Just things that are common, I don't want to say mistakes, but common things that I see in class that could lead to some injury. So one of the things is when you do your high plank, you're drawing your belly in and up, shoulders stacked over your wrists. You want to make sure that you're not dipping your hips. So when you dip your hips, you're putting all this stress into your low back, and that really hurts. Does not feel good. So you want to pull your belly in. Now, if you cannot do a high plank pose without your hips dipping, that is a sign that you need to drop to your knees. So don't compromise the alignment of your pose because you feel like dropping your knees means it's bad or something. No, like drop to your knees so that you don't put that pressure on your low back. And over time, you will build the strength to do like a full solid high plank. So that's one thing. The other thing too is, I often see students go from a high plank, and rather than bending their elbows to go to a low plank, they go right into an upward facing dog. So they kind of like skip the low plank, which is like the hard part. So 2 reasons why not to do that. Number 1, that will really hurt your low back. And number 2, you're missing out on the low plank, so you're missing out on building that upper arm strength. So if you want to see progress in your practice, don't skip out on the low plank. So I will see a high plank, and I often see instead of a low plank, I will see students go upward, like just right into upward facing dog without bending their elbows. So again, if you find like you don't have the strength to do that, or perhaps you're too tired, drop to your knees, bend your elbows. Like no shame in dropping to your knees. This is still challenging, believe me. Like I'm feeling this for sure. So drop to your knees, bend your elbows, and then go into your upward facing dog. Awesome. Okay, thanks very much.